How's it going, guys? Today I want to talk to you a bit about overclocking your Vega graphics card. Now, I'm making this video in early 2019 because when I was looking back in summer of 2018 on how to overclock Vega, I found a lot of videos on how to set it up for mining, right? How to make it pull less power so you can get more efficiency when you're mining. However, in 2019, mining is basically dead on graphics cards, so let's show you now let's take a look at how we can get more performance out of our games with Vega. So first thing you want to do is make sure you open up into your Radeon settings. Go over here to updates and make sure you're on the current update. I'm on 19.2.2. Alright, so from there we're going to go into gaming, global settings, and global Wattman. This is going to be our best tool for overclocking Vega. Now some people like to use other software. Wattman is what I've had the best luck with. So let's look here, and this is going to give us a lot of information as well. And as you can see here, I have mine already overclocked, and this is my basic everyday overclock. I can push it a little higher if I wanted to, but this works well in the games that I play, and even in AAA games it holds out very well and gives me quite a bit more performance, and we'll take a look at some performance metrics at the end. But before we get there, let me show you some tips and tricks on how you can better overclock your Vega. The basic stuff is still going to apply, but there's some little quirks. So let's take a look. So let me reset everything. So now this is how you're going to see it once you open up Wattman. Everything's going to be grayed out. No overclock. This is stock. Now stock performance is pretty pathetic, let's be honest, right? None of the reviewers, rightly so, were impressed with the out-of-the-box basic balanced performance, and the drivers weren't really that good when the card came out. Today the drivers are much better, and we can tweak a lot more settings to get more out of our Vega graphics card. Now if you leave it in balanced or even turbo, you're not really going to have a good time. Of course, if you play old games or not very demanding games, you're going to have just fine, but you can do that with an RX 580, which you can get for really cheap right now. So really, if you're doing this, you want to push it and you want to make sure you're playing games that can take advantage of that. So essentially you want to jump straight into custom, just hit that apply button and scroll down. Now for those of you who don't like to mess around with your graphics card, don't like benchmarking, don't like tinkering with things, I'm going to show you what you can do. But just so you know, this card is a tinkerer's dream. It loves to be messed with and to tweak all these little settings to get the most out of them. So basically, for those of you who just want to do a quick and dirty overclock, just go ahead and grab the power limit and slide this all the way to 50%. Now for you, that's going to be as far as it goes. Just slide it all the way to the right, hit apply. I have a little bit of a mod going on, which allows me to pull 150%, but don't worry about that. So we're going to pull just about 50%, and then go over here, click this button on frequency under the memory, and set that frequency to like 1050. Okay, I like to run mine at 1050. Some people are stable at 1040, some people are stable at 1100 or more. So this is going to be where you have to go in and test and mess around with your graphics card a bit to find out exactly where yours falls. But this should be pretty much achievable on most people's cards. This power limit is going to help with our overclock on our memory, and it's going to help stabilize those clock speeds on the core. If you just want to stop here, this is totally fine. It's not that hard. It's pretty easy, and you're going to see a jump in performance. That's all you have to do. Now for the rest of you out there who love to mess with things and tinker with your graphics cards, and overclocking and benchmarking is fun to you, like it is to me, this is where we're going to get into a bit more of the nitty-gritty. So off the bat, if you want to overclock this card and get its true performance, you want to slide this all the way to 150%. Now as I said already, some of you won't be able to do that. What you have to do is basically do a registry edit. What that'll do is allow the card to pull more power. Now it's not always going to pull more power, and it's not going to, basically you won't even be pulling 150%. That's just there for kind of a cushion. You're probably going to be pulling more than about 60 to 80% over the power limit. So really not too much more than what you already have in the driver, but just a little bit more goes a long way. Now, I'm not going to sit here and explain to you the whole process of doing that. I'll link a video in the description made by buildzoid over on Actually Hardcore Overclocking, and he takes you step by step through it. He shows you where to get everything and what values you need to adjust and exactly how to do it. Alright, he does it much better than I do, and he actually knows what he's talking about. So I'll link that in the description below. Go do that and apply the other things I'm going to tell you. in this video. So do that first, and you can leave the memory where it is. Now we're also going to want to check the voltage, alright? That's going to unlock our voltage on the core, and we want to open up our core frequency. Now on my card, the base frequency on the core is 1600. Alright, at the max power state, it's going to hit 1600. However, it actually doesn't. A lot of the reviewers notice this too. A lot of people who try to overclock this card will notice this too, that when they tell it to run at a certain speed, it seems to never actually hit that speed. You tell it to run 1600, you might get around 1540, 1550, 1560, somewhere in that range, right? Sometimes a bit lower if it's overheating or doesn't have enough power, hence the 150% power limit. So what's going on here? Well, I don't know exactly what's going on, but what I've perceived and noticed in my own testing is I need to set it about 50 megahertz higher than what I actually want the card to run at. So if I want it to run 1600, I actually have to go in there and type in 1650, and at 1650 you'll get closer to 1600. Don't know why it does that. I don't know if it's a driver issue or a hardware issue or both, but that seems to be something that's going on. For as long as I've owned this card, it's done this, and you have to go in there and manually set it to about 50 megahertz higher. Now, I would mess around with this on yours. Maybe yours needs to go a little bit higher, a little bit lower. Maybe yours works fine, but at least on mine, and I've noticed this on other people who've made videos, you have to set the overclock higher than what you actually wanted to run at. So that's what you need to keep in mind when you're adjusting your frequencies. Again, this is a tinker's dream, so you want to get in there and tweak these numbers, run some tests, see if you're getting a higher score, and if you're getting a higher score, you know that your overclock is working. Another way to find out is using this graph up here. This graph is so useful. It'll tell you basically real time what your performance is, and it'll also keep the peak numbers on the side here. I don't find the average that useful, but peak and being able to look at it in real time really helps out a lot. So leaving this open while you run a benchmark, and then when the benchmark's over, coming in here and looking at the core clock and the memory frequency and the temperature and all that stuff can really give you that critical information that you need to go ahead and adjust these settings, right? So if you typed in 1650 and over here it's saying 1600, you know what's going on there. You know you need to keep bumping up that clock speed to get higher clock speed, but it's not going to be what you set it to. Alright, now the second thing, and I'm sure you've heard of this, is undervolting. Now everyone's card can undervolt a little bit better or a little bit worse than others. Okay, so when you're doing that, you're going to want to go in here and adjust it, let's say at first by 50 millivolt interval. So it's 1250. Go ahead and put in 1150 and see if it runs. Let it benchmark, maybe do a stress test. Alright, let it sit for a little while, see what's going on. If everything is cool, then maybe drop it a little bit lower. Alright, once you get to a frequency that you like, start going a little bit lower. Sometimes you can get a little bit higher frequency by going a little bit lower in voltage. I know, weird, confusing, I don't know exactly why that is, but I found that I get my best overclocks at about 1150 millivolts. Alright, so a little bit lower got me a little bit further. Now, of course, if I was liquid cooling or something like that, everything would be a little different, but in this sense, that's what you want to do, right? And so just keep adjusting that. Once you hit a point where it's starting to artifact or crash or it's unstable, just try going back up, but at something like 25 millivolts. You know, keep getting smaller and smaller. So go back up at 25, then maybe start going back down at 10 or 5 millivolts until you find that sweet spot. All right, now for me that was 1150 on the maximum power state at state 7, but for you it might be 1100, maybe 1110, maybe 1140. Who knows? That's up to you, and it's going to vary program to program. So even after you finish stress testing it, go ahead and play all the games that you normally play to test it out to see how that really is going to come together. Okay, now down here is our fan curve. Now if you look, the stock fan curve is very conservative. This is because of noise. They don't want it to be too loud, so they have this fan curve. This is going to let the card get very hot. As you can see, 80 degrees, it's going to be at 40% fan speed. It's not very fast. So that means your card's basically going to throttle on the stock fan curve. So you're going to want to see where your tolerances are when it comes to sound and temperature, and just go ahead and move these sliders around, you know, and find where you enjoy it. Again, the hotter it gets, the faster you want that fan to spin to keep the temperatures as low as possible, so you can keep the highest possible clock speed, right? These cards, just like all other modern graphics cards, as they get hotter, they start to slightly throttle. Now, it's not completely outright thermal throttling, but once they hit like 60 or 65 degrees Celsius, they really start to pull back on those clocks. So you might be fine, and then all of a sudden see your frame rate drop. That's what's going on. You need to set a higher fan speed. Now, of course, this is going to all come down to what you can tolerate in terms of sound from the fans on the graphics card, and that's also going to affect how you can overclock. So of course you might want to run like an 1800 megahertz overclock, but if you can't handle the sound of those fans going at 100% all the time, then you're going to want to have to dial all that stuff back. All right, so you're going to want to play around with this, but mine is kind of like this right here, and it's pretty aggressive because mine's in a case, it's not that loud, it has 3 fans on it. I'm fine with that. Okay, and this is basically what I set my memory frequency to. Some people need to adjust their voltage. I seem to have to adjust my voltage on it. Some people don't, and they get away with that. Some people think it doesn't do anything. I really don't know, but for me, I found it to be a bit more stable at 1150 megahertz. However, it could do nothing. I don't know, but that's where I put mine. Your mileage may vary. Test it out, see what happens, and keep adjusting things. Now, something I did notice, and I do want to bring this up, again, I really don't know why these things are happening. These are just things that I have observed and had to deal with. What I've noticed, and this is weird, but when my memory frequency goes a little, let's say, haywire, right? It's unstable. It shows itself in the core clock speed. I know this sounds weird. I'll see in the graph, everything looks fine, and then right when it crashes, the core clock spikes. It like tries to go super high for some reason, and that causes the card to crash. And then I will turn down my core clock speed, let's say from 1700 to 1650, and the same thing will happen, but this time all within clock speeds that I know the card can hit, and continue that process. And I found that when I dial back my memory overclock, that fixed the issue. Again, I don't know why those two things are linked, but sometimes when you crash and it looks like it's the core, it's actually the memory. So keep that in mind when you are having a hard time overclocking. So let's go ahead and apply my overclock. And this is my overclock. I run at 1752 at 1150 millivolts, which means I'm actually running at around 1700 at 1150 millivolts, which is pretty good over the stock card. This is my fan curve, so I have it set to 90% at 70 degrees Celsius. Remember what I told you, that at about 60 to 70 degrees is when it really starts to pull back those clocks. So when it gets that hot, I want it to start spinning up and really cooling the card down to keep that maximum performance, alright? Again, it comes down to you. I game with headphones on, it's in a case, it gets loud, I can kind of hear it, but not too much. It doesn't bother me. But if you're really sensitive to sound, you might want to pull this back and also pull back your overclock along with it. Again, 150% on the power limit, I'll link that video down below, and 1050 at 1150 millivolts on the memory. With this setup, you're going to get a much better graphics card, just more performance. And again, your mileage is going to vary, every card's different, but these are some tricks you can keep in mind so that when you're having issues overclocking, you know what to do. Whether that is setting the clock speed 50 megahertz higher, or that is setting your fan curves to be much more aggressive, or whether that's adjusting your memory overclock, or adjusting or lowering your voltage, which might go against what traditionally happens. Anyways, that's what you need to do, so let's take a look at those benchmark results. So basically, I ran TimeSpy, right? TimeSpy 1.0, 3D Mark, and I have 3 different sets of results. The first one is stock. So this is the stock Sapphire Nitro Plus Vega 64. Alright, so this is the specific version I'm running. That does matter. Different versions are a little bit better, a little bit worse than others, but I'll talk more about that in a different video. So the stock performance, I got a score of 7,271. So that's our baseline, 7,271. That's really not that great of a score. It's okay, but it's not that great. It's definitely slower than a 1080 in that regard. Now, if you look at just the memory overclock, giving it a memory overclock and 50% power limit, we jump all the way up to 7,511. Now remember, that is a very easy, quick overclock you can do. Basically, everyone can do it. Basically, has no issue. Leave it on auto voltage. Just hit those sliders. You're gonna get a decent jump in performance just by doing that alone. Again, it's not gonna break any records, but for a very like 2 second overclock, not bad at all. Now the last result is when we go all out. This is my overclock, the one that I just showed you guys, the one I run every day in every game, rock solid, stable, 150% offset, and I'm getting a score of 8,190. That's about 1,000 points ahead of the stock performance. And again, this card can go harder. I just don't like running it that way every day. This is a stable everyday overclock. So that's doing pretty well. That's a pretty good score. And remember, these are scores I'm getting with my Ryzen 1800X CPU with 16 gigs of RAM at 3000. All right, so this other factors, there's other factors at play here, but definitely a very decent card, especially if you like to mess around and tinker with it. And you can get quite a bit more performance just by overclocking it, and if you know how to overclock it. Anyways, this was my little tips and tricks videos on how to overclock Vega. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. If you've had any, differing results, or how overclocking has gone for you, or maybe if you understand it better than I do, please help me out. Anyways, I'll catch you guys in the next one.